up my hands, open up my heart, open up my daydreams, Lord, show me where to start.
So after our keynote, we'll have questions and answers. So if you need a card, go and grab a card. For those online, use the chat feature, and they'll send me a text message with your questions, and then I'll be able to ask them at the end. As Jeremy said, I'm Richard Bodini. I am a pastor in a very unique setting in Brampton, Ontario. You can ask me about that if you're interested. It is the most unique church in the Christian Reformed Church. For those of you that know, that's why they're laughing. I serve one demographic, age demographic that is, and it is the best job ever. And I'm committed to be Christian Reformed for the people that have called me. The providence of God is beautiful and challenging at the same time. Chong's life journey is a reflection of that doctrine. Chong was enfolded into campus ministry through the kind presence of Tom and Alice Osterhuis, the University of Alberta in Edmonton. Chong was also the first campus minister at Canada's most secular university, York University. More recently, we have known him as the editor of The Banner, a Christian Reformed publication, where he invited readers to deeply reflect on the Bible, doctrine, and life from many angles, like looking at a diamond very closely. Emmanuel, God with us, is an Advent and Christmas term. And my question is, why isn't it a daily theme for all of Christians? This morning, Chong invites us to reflect on God with us, a Christianity Canada needs. Please welcome Shiao Chong.
Good morning. Oh, you all can hear me. I'm just going to put on my timer so that I don't go overboard. I think you will thank me for that.
We'll stay.
Thank you, Jeremy, and worship music team. Thank you for the selection of songs. It was beautiful. You can see me over here in the corner, but I was crying. Good morning to all of you here and those who are watching online. First, I want to just thank you all, not just only for inviting me to this to speak, but also for all the encouragement you have given me personally. Many of you know my story and what has happened to me at Synod this past year, but over the past few days here, since I've been here since Wednesday, I felt a lot of love from a lot of you, a lot of encouragement, support, and I'm deeply grateful. Thank you for all. Thanks. I'm an immigrant to Canada. I was born and raised in Malaysia, and before I ended up as an international student, as already mentioned, at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And there I got involved in the Christian Reformed campus ministry. And that was how I ended up joining the Christian Reformed Church. And that's also where I met my wife, Martha, who was born and raised, baptized CRC. Yeah. And I've now, and eventually I became a Canadian citizen. And I've now lived longer in Canada than I have in my birth country. All right? This is my home. And I love this country. And that is partly why I want to be part of this. I'm curious. I'm wondering what is God doing with this summit. I'm curious to see what the Spirit might be sowing and growing out of this for Canada. I've been praying and hoping for some sort of revival in Canada for God's church. So I just want to join Jesus in his ongoing work here. Speaking of my wife, and I think she's watching. Love you, honey. Oh, you know? Okay, good. Thank you. Oh, it's confirmed that she's watching. Thank you. My wife, Martha, is a scientist. She specializes in vaccine development. And her fellow scientists at her work company knows that she's a Christian, married to a pastor, well, a former pastor now. But one of her colleagues, who is not a Christian, but one of her colleagues, in the conversations with her, once said these words to her. Next slide, please. He said this: I find that there are two types of Christians. One type is so kind, loving, and decent that I can't help but find them and their faith so attractive. And the other type is the opposite. So hateful, harsh, and hurtful that I cannot help but be turned off by them and by Christianity. I'm sure all of you have heard of the song, "They will know we are Christians by our love." You know this. You sang it. But have you heard or seen of this phrase? For the next one. Have you ever heard of this? There is no hate like Christian love. It is popular enough that this phrase is on t-shirts and hoodies on Amazon Canada. I got this picture of Amazon Canada, all right? You can also buy it on mugs, on Etsy, and some other shopping platforms. There is no hate like Christian love. We are singing, they will know us. They will know we are Christians by our love, and they are saying there is no hate like Christian love. How has it come to this? And should we not be grieved by this? Next slide. There's a certain brand of American Christianity that currently seems to be dominant. A certain brand, I say, that is increasingly being defined by the word against. It is marked by being against something. It's against liberalism, against feminism, against woke ideology, against the LGBTQ plus agenda, against diversity, equity, inclusion, you name it, whatever, against something. It's based on warfare. It is combative, aggressive, and even judgmental. There's always seemed to be an underlying hint of superiority and arrogance, an underlying smugness that they're always right, that God is definitely on their side. And implied with this against posture is a belief that they're doing all of this, fighting and combating for God. They're fighting liberalism for God. They're against feminism for God. And all this harshness and aggressiveness is all justified because it is done for God, in God's name. How does the people who are on the receiving end of this feel or experience it? How do the non-Christians who are on the receiving end of this feel and experience? I think they experience it as God is against us. Whether it's intended or not, that's the perception. God is against us. Or at least the Christian God is against us. There is no hate like Christian love. I am convinced that this brand of Christianity would be a disaster in Canada. Regardless of how successful it may or may not be in the United States, but if this brand of Christianity becomes the dominant brand here in Canada, I predict that it would result in the word Christian becoming synonymous with the word evil in Canada for most Canadians. Instead, I think it is time for Canadian Christians to forge our own path that fits with our Canadian spiritual landscape and our Canadian ethos. I propose that we draw deeply from the doctrine of the incarnation, God with us. Of course, this comes from Matthew chapter 1, verse 23. Look, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Or as the Message translation puts this, about the incarnation, the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. God moved into the neighborhood. No, not yet. Leave that up there. Thank you. God moved into our neighborhood. And it seems from the beginning with Adam and Eve already in the Garden of Eden, and all the way into the future in the new heaven and earth, God seems to love hanging out with us. God seems to love being in our neighborhood, right? Now you turn to the next slide. See, in Revelation 21, verse 3 says, after the creation of the new heaven and earth, it says, see, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. God will be with them. God is creating a home, not only a home for us, he's creating a home with us, so that he can dwell with us forever and ever and ever. That seems to be God's heartbeat, is to be with us. A Christianity that Canada needs, well, honestly, a Christianity that the world needs, really, is one that is identified more by this word with, not against, with. It is marked by being with people, with the community, serving with people, not just to them, but with our neighbors. Next slide. With implies mutuality, give and take. It implies alongside, not over and against something. It implies compassion, not judgment. It implies vulnerability, not superiority. So how do we channel God with us in Canada to our neighbors? What does our withness look like? I'm going to suggest that there are 6 themes. There may be more. You could probably dream up a few more other things, but I'm just going to talk about 6 themes. There's already a lot. This is why I'm looking at the clock. I'm going to talk about 6 themes, and they all start with the letter H to help us remember. Hope offered, harm avoidance, how matters, holistic emphasis, heart-centered, humility embracing. I think if we focus on these 6 themes, on our withness, on being God with us, I think we'll be doing pretty good. So let me just quickly go through them, each one. Hope offered. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 13 says, and now faith, hope, and love remain. These 3, and the greatest of these is love. In this context, the Apostle Paul in Corinthians was talking about many things, good things will cease. Prophecy, speaking in tongues will cease, will end, will come to an end. Even knowledge will come to an end. But these 3 things will remain into the new heaven and new earth, presumably. Faith, hope, and love. Hope is one of the things that will remain into the new heaven and earth. Now, the phrase that we read from Matthew chapter 1, God is with us, was originally a quote from Isaiah 7. And the original context of the promise of Emmanuel in Isaiah 7 was as a sign of hope for the people of Israel who were facing an imminent attack from the enemies who were allied together against them. And so the sign of the virgin birth that Isaiah gave was a way of saying there's a sign of God is with us. There's going to be hope. God has not abandoned us, even if it looks like all our enemies are surrounding us. And Matthew picked up that thread of hope and applied it in his gospel to the hope for the humanity, for all of us. In these times in Canada, I think that a lot of people need some hope. From political polarization to climate change, from economic uncertainty to housing crisis, from internal voices calling for separation to external voices calling us the 51st state. I think it's easy for us Canadians to feel gloom and doom these days and to feel a bit surrounded. A God with us posture is firstly a posture that seeks to offer hope. And how do we offer hope to people? I think many of you probably could come up with a whole bunch of ways of doing that, and some of you probably already have done so in the past and are still doing so. But I'm just give you, let's say 2 things, 2 among many possibilities. First, we can show them how God is with us still. Just as Isaiah and Matthew saying, giving the sign that God is with us. Remind people that God is with us, not against us. We do this by kind of pointing out the good that we see in the world. Look at the helpers. Look at the good that is progressing, even if it's small. Look at where we have been and how we are here now. Point to the promises that God has for the future, where God will right all wrongs and bring justice to the world. So by pointing people to the good that has happened and is happening and will happen, we are sort of reminding people that God is with us. He was with us in the past, He is with us now, and He will be with us in the future. And secondly, I think we can offer hope by walking with people in their journeys. Join them. If somebody is getting tired and hopeless working on something, it'll be very, very encouraging and very hopeful for them if somebody joins them and say, hey, let me give you a hand, right? That's really encouraging and hopeful for them. Hey, okay, now we got more people doing this stuff. If somebody is feeling hopeless, tired about poverty, for example, join them in alleviating poverty. Somebody's feeling hopeless and tired about climate change, join them in whatever work that we could do in terms of combating climate change. You get the idea. Whenever possible, join them, walk with them, so that they're not alone. And that's how people will feel encouraged and have hope. Next, we do no harm. Romans 13 verse 10 says, love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. How do people think there is no hate like Christian love? I guess when Christians do harm in the name of Christian love. Whether it is physical harm or emotional harm or psychological harm or verbal harm or keyboard typing harm. Any kind of harm, we must try to avoid harm. I don't need to tell you how much the sexual abuses and the abuses of power in the past by Christian leaders have done a lot of harm to their victims and have caused so much pain and so many Christians to stumble in their faith. If you read the book by Blessed Are the Undone by Angela Bick and Peter Sherman, you hear the stories of people who are deconstructing their faith, and one of the factors among a few other factors, but one of the factors is this: Christian leaders being abusive. And how much that has destroyed the credibility and witness of the church. So I want to delve too much on that. Let's move on. Next. I think we must really stop doing tough love. Like quote unquote tough love. I don't know if you hear this phrase or know much about this, but I grew up hearing a lot about tough love, that you need to show tough love for the good of the person. It only works in very specific relationships where both parties in many ways mutually consent to this, right? If they understand what's going on, understand there is an underlying unconditional love underneath that, like parents and children perhaps, right? Or a coach and somebody who trainee who understands, I'm going to this and I know my coach is going to be tough on me so that I can be better. They understood there's a mutual commitment to it. But in any other cases, I would think tough love sometimes just becomes an excuse to just be cruel and mean. I think we also need to retire the phrase, love the sinner, hate the sin. We should retire the phrase because you know what? I think hate the sin has just become simply permission to be judgmental. Hate the sin has just become permission to be harsh or cover to do that. Cover to discriminate against people. Hate the sin has become cover to put conditions on loving people. Why don't we just love the sinner, period? Amen. Right? Love the sinner, period. And let the Holy Spirit deal with people's sins. And focus and worry more about your own sins. I worry more about my own sins, and I don't have time to worry about yours, really. Right? I'm worried about the log in my eye. I don't have time to worry about the speck in yours. God has appointed us to be ambassadors of his reconciliation. That was in 1 Corinthians. We are ambassadors of God's reconciliation. Now, we need to be good ambassadors. We've seen sometimes examples of bad ambassadors, but we need to be good ambassadors of Christ's reconciliation. God did not appoint us to be the sin police. We're not the morality police going out giving people tickets for offenses. And God has appointed us as ambassadors of his reconciliation. Talking about tough love leads me to my next point. How matters. How we do something, not just what we do and why we do it. How we say something, not just what we say and why we say it. How makes a big difference in what is being received, and what is being understood, and what is being experienced. How we show love to our neighbors makes a big difference as to whether they experience it as love or as hate. 2 Corinthians 10 verse 3 says, can you move the next slide, please? This is from the Message translation. The world is unprincipled. It's dog eat dog out there. The world doesn't fight fair. But we don't live or fight our battles that way. Never have and never will. How we do things are different. Romans 12 verse 17, do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought or consider what is noble in the sight of all. Not just what is noble in the sight of Christians, but what is noble in the sight of all. Do they see what I'm doing as noble? Next slide. I strongly believe that the ends do not justify the means. Godly ends do not justify ungodly means of achieving them. Trying to defend Christianity or further God's ways does not justify bearing false witness, for example, or abusing power to silence dissenters. Instead, I believe godly ends should shape the means. Next slide. I think we also need to focus on how in terms of our Christian discipleship, right? Our own spirituality. For example, I think we are very good in our tradition of focusing on teaching people what to believe, what to do, what to obey. But how good are we at teaching people how to read the Bible, how to think Christianly, and how to carry out the mission? But we focus a lot on what they should do, what they should think. Another example is that we often encourage people to defend God's truth, but we don't talk about how do we defend God's truth. Or another big one is how do we disagree with one another? I don't think we have put enough thought into this area of how. There seems to be an assumption that if we get the what and the why correct, it would just sort of automatically, flow down and the how would take care of itself. Clearly, that assumption is wrong. Next slide. Speaking of how, it leads me to thinking about we need to emphasize the need to be holistic. And we need to be holistic in two areas at least, holistic in mission and holistic in spirituality. Next slide. So in terms of mission, Colossians 1:20 says, and through him, Christ, that is, through Jesus, God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, not just all human beings, but all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. Our Reformed tradition helps us with this holistic mission piece. I think we are good at this. We have often emphasized that word and deed must go together. We have often emphasized we talk about every square inch or every square centimeter is every square inch or every square centimeter in the world is a mission field, right? The all things that is mentioned here. So I don't need to say too much about that. So I'll move on to the spirituality thing, though. When it comes to our spirituality, however, our Reformed tradition tends to be rather cerebral. It tends to be rather intellectual. Our discipleship is almost reduced at times to just downloading information. Right? What is for the longest time in the Christian Reformed Church's tradition, right? What is the main form of discipleship of young people? Catechism. And it's all about downloading information. As if you get the information right, everything else is going to automatically follow, as it were. I think we need to balance out our intellectualism, which is a strength, and we don't want to throw that out, but we want to balance that out with a deeper understanding of how our emotions and how our imaginations impact our walk with God. How do we incorporate more the gifts of the visual arts, music, poetry into our spiritual lives, into our daily walk, into our theology, into our ecclesiology as church? Could we be more contemplative? I'm preaching to myself here too. I need to grow in this area as well. I'll admit that. I'm rather cerebral. All right? Speaking of holistic spirituality, that brings me to the next point. The heart. Heart-centered. You know the famous commandment here, right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind and your neighbor as yourself. Luke 10, verse 27. I'm not going to exegete that, but I'm just going to adapt it a little bit. I'm riffing it off it. Can I say that we, as a Reformed tradition, has been very good at loving God with our minds and very good at loving God with our strength even. But I'm not so sure if we are very good at loving God with our hearts, so to speak. We need to align our hearts with God's heart. Do we love what God loves? Do we desire what God desires? Or are we so focused on just trying to think after God's thoughts that we are not trying to love after what God loves? Next slide. You probably have heard the words orthodoxy and orthopraxy before. Orthodoxy means correct beliefs or correct doctrines. Orthopraxy means correct practices or correct behaviors. We obviously need both. And our Reformed tradition has been very, very strongly emphasizing orthodoxy, right? Sometimes too much, but we are very good at this. And I think sometimes we shy a little bit or mute a little bit orthopraxy because in theory we are afraid about works righteousness, so maybe we're a bit shy about that. But here's a third term, orthocardia. I learned this from David French, a journalist in the US, by the way. Orthocardia, which means a correct heart or loving correctly. I don't think we have emphasized that enough. We often focus so much on orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and just assume that the heart will automatically be shaped, as it were. Again, I think we can look at history and even look at the present and think and realize that that's probably naive to think that way. When it comes to our disagreements in the church, can we maybe think that orthodoxy isn't the be-all and the end-all? Even if we cannot agree on what is correct beliefs or correct doctrines, is it possible that we can agree on what are the correct practices? Can we agree on what is the correct way of loving people? Can we agree on what God loves and what God desires, and we can desire and love the same thing? Do we need to be, does unity fall and depend on orthodoxy, or does unity can also depend on orthopraxy and orthocardia? Can we be united around those two things, even if we cannot be united totally around all three? 2 out of 3 in bad, right, I say. But that's what I'm saying. It's just, orthodoxy is not the be-all and end-all. And why is it the defining thing? Next slide. The final theme here, we need to embrace humility. We need to value humility a lot more than we have. The Apostle Peter writes, "Finally, all of you have unity of spirit, sympathy, love for one another, a tender heart, and a humble mind." 1 Peter 3, verse 8. Think about it, right? If unity is defined by this, if Christian unity is defined by this, by a unity of spirit, sympathy for one another, love for one another, a tender heart, and a humble mind. There's nothing in there about doctrine, by the way. Our Christian unity would look a lot different, wouldn't it? If it's defined by these qualities that Peter is talking about. And anyways, he also says in 1 Peter 5, "And all of you must clothe yourselves with humility." Must, it's not optional. Must clothe yourselves with humility in your dealings with one another. And he even gives a warning there. "For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." Humility is not about being a doormat. It's not about humiliating yourself. It's not about giving in or compromising. You can be humble and principled and courageous all at the same time, all right? I don't want to brag, but there was one time somebody told me that she was chair of the Banner Advisory Committee at one point before her term was over, and she told me, one-on-one, she said, "You are humble but yet principled and stubborn." There's a stubborn humility about you, she was saying about me. So all I'm just saying is that it's possible to be both, all right? Humility is not simply about giving in. you can have principles. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it is more about properly knowing yourself, knowing your strengths and your weaknesses, knowing your limitations, knowing your proper relationship with God. Humility is having a really good look in the mirror. And humility is also not thinking so much about yourself, thinking about yourself less, and thinking more about other people's concerns, other people's needs, and thinking more highly about other people, and valuing them, and learning from them. Next slide. This leads me to talking about intellectual humility, because I think we need to talk about this in a Reformed tradition, because it is our strength. Our intellectual robustness is our strength, but a strength can also be a weakness, all right? I learned that from my Shakespeare professor in university, but I don't want to go into the details. I'm running out of time. You can ask me later how that connects to strength and as well as a weakness. But sometimes we are downright arrogant about our intellectual superiority as a Reformed Christian. I think Christians don't take seriously enough or even be aware enough of all the cognitive biases that fallen human beings have, of how many ways that our minds can play tricks with us, or even how many ways our hearts, our underlying deep subconscious stuff actually is driving the head, all right? I'll give you a short little image. I read this from Jonathan Haidt, the psychologist. He talks about the image of the elephant and the rider on the elephant. The elephant's huge, and the elephant has to be trained, of course, in real life and whatever. But the analogy, the metaphor is this: if the elephant decides to go somewhere, really decides to go somewhere, there's nothing that the little rider on the top can do anything to stop it, right? So the rider is our rationality, is our mind, is our intellect, the conscious part of our intellect. That's the rider. The rest of our body, everything else, the subconscious psychology, our feelings, our emotions, our imaginations, our everything else, all our biases, all of that, that's the elephant. Very often, the elephant is going to choose go where it wants to go, and us, the rider, are just rationalizing it. Oh, I always want to go here anyways, Really. Very often, the mind, we think the rider's in charge, we think our mind is in charge, but actually the elephant's in charge, and the mind is just trying to find ways to justify the elephant's choices. And we won't admit this to ourselves. We are deluding ourselves and lying to ourselves. And we are arguing rider to rider, but nobody's talking to the elephants. You see what I'm saying? And we're getting nowhere. We're getting nowhere. Next slide. I want to have a little warning here, talking about humility. Sometimes some Christians weaponize humility, all right? Some Christians weaponize humility as a way to shame and silence those who disagree with them. They might say something like this: if you are truly humble, then you will simply submit and obey to what God clearly says in the Bible. Have you heard of this? Something like this? It's an example of weaponizing humility to shame and silence people. But humility is not defined by submitting and obeying. And I will argue that Christians who weaponize humility in this way are the ones who are spiritually arrogant, right? And let me do this. Give me a bit of time to do this, right? I'm gonna use a baseball story. I hope it's not too soon for Blue Jays fans for me to use a blue baseball analogy, okay? This analogy was retold. I read it in Richard Middleton and Brian Walsh's book, Truth is Stranger Than It Used to Be. So there are three umpires who go have a beer after a baseball game, and the first umpire says this: there's balls and there's strikes, and I call them the way they are. The second umpire says, well, there's balls and there's strikes, and I call them the way I see them, as I see them. And the third one says, there's balls and there's strikes, but hey, man, they're nothing until I call them, all right? This story illustrates three different ways of understanding how we discover truth. The first umpire believes that he can have direct perception and direct knowledge of truth. What I see is truth. If I see is a ball, it must be a ball. I call them as they are. The second one is what they call a perspectival realist. Perspectival realist. I call them as I see it because he recognizes that we don't always see the world perfectly. We see the world only through our perspective, our limitations, as well as our strengths. There's a big elephant here, right? I call them as I see them. Now, the third umpire is radical perspective. He's pushing it to his extreme. He's basically saying that our perspective determines the truth. They're nothing until I call them. I determine what's a ball and what's a strike. I have the power. I decide what is true. Which of these three umpires do you think are more humble? Which of these three do you think is more humble? Two, that's right. Because the third one is obviously arrogant. I have all the power, I decide what's right and wrong, right? But the first one is also arrogant in the sense that he believes that everything he sees is absolute truth, absolutely corresponds to reality. That means he is never wrong, right? If I see it as a ball and I call it as a ball, it must be a ball. I'm not wrong. If it's a strike, it's a strike. I am never wrong. Well, that's arrogant, right? It's only the second umpire that is more humble. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. I can only call it as I see it. That's the best I can do. Next slide. Oh, yeah, you're here, right, okay. So the Christians who weaponizes humility and say if you are truly humble, then you will simply submit and obey what God clearly says in the Bible, they're acting like the first umpire. Because it's so clear to them, they must be 100% correct. It must be absolute truth. That is absolutely what God says, and everybody else must just simply submit and obey. And if you disagree with me, then you must be the proud one. You must be the third umpire, so to speak. But that's not necessarily true. The first umpire is also arrogant. It is also arrogant to say that my reading has to be absolutely correct, has to be absolute truth, because that's how I see it. It's clear to me, and therefore it must be clear to everybody else. I don't think so. We can only always approach God's truth through our limited perspectives, every single one of us, with our strengths and with our limitations. We got to recognize there's always the elephant there that we are sitting on that shapes where and how we read things. I'm sorry I took a ton of time on this one point, but I think it's important. Next slide. So these are the 6 themes that I believe are important in shaping our witness, our God with us Christianity. Hope offered, harm avoidance, how matters, holistic emphasis, heart-centered, and humility embracing. What difference does this make? Do I have time? Can I take 10 more minutes or so? Okay, let me just briefly suggest how it might change our spiritual posture, how it might impact our organizational posture, and how it might impact our missional posture, all right? So next slide, spiritual posture. I've already been touching on this as I go along. Well, let me just summarize it this way. A God with us spirituality leans more into a spirituality of vulnerability rather than a spirituality of mastery. The against posture needs mastery in some sense. Mastery of religious knowledge, mastery of religious practices, all in the name of discipleship. It requires mastery because otherwise you cannot be superior, right? You cannot assume superiority. You cannot assume that you are right if you don't master these things. Ironically though, right? Ironically then, if you see it closely, unintentionally, by focusing on mastery, on what we do, what we know, we are focusing on our human efforts. Even while we are paying lip service to God's grace in our spirituality, grace, unearned mercy, unearned, undeserved love, not based on what we do, whether we earn it or not based on what we do, but by focusing on mastery, we are unintentionally focusing on some sort of works-based righteousness, even doctrinal righteousness, right? And it's also a one-size-fits-all model. Everybody has to measure up to this model of spirituality, and if you don't measure up, you are less than. A spirituality that is marked with, by the way, with humility, centering on the heart, more about being vulnerable before God, and to some extent vulnerable with each other, is not a one-size-fits-all. It takes more seriously the concept of spirituality as relational. And I know that, again, there's another phrase that we use, you use a lot of lip service to as well. We talk a lot about, it's a relationship with God, not religion. And then you go in, and then you say, you gotta do this, A, B, C, D, E. You gotta come to Sunday, and you gotta come every second Sunday service, or you're gonna come to a prayer meeting, and you gotta do Bible studies how many times, and you got to, and you gotta make sure you serve this and that, and volunteer for this, and vote this way. It's a bait and switch. You promote relationship, and then you come in here, you gotta join the factory line. And cookie cutter, everybody has to do the same thing. Real relationships, there are no 2 relationships that are identical, right? I have 3 daughters. They don't all have the same relationship with me precisely. They relate to me as their father, and I as they are my children, but each one of them are unique. Each one of them is different. Why do we think that each one of us are going to relate to God in identical cookie cutter ways? Why? If we truly believe it is relationship and relational, then let it be relationship and relational. Let us recognize there's a diversity of ways each of us have express that relationship with God. Next slide. Organizational posture. How does God with us impact our organizational posture with each other? The God against us brand emphasizes a command and control posture, because that's what you need when you're at war, right? If you're constantly at war with enemies, both external and inside, you need all kinds of command and control, general commanding and controlling forces thing. You always focus on practicing power over others. It is coercive, controlling, manipulative, even violent in some degrees. It defaults to a brick wall posture, right? Metaphorically speaking. Or as a friend once said, they're more interested in, I got a call coming in. They're more interested in building fences rather than gates. That's a quote from a friend of mine. Instead, a God with us posture focuses on power with, sharing power. It's about empowering each other. It's about collaboration, consensus, creativity. It allows for some flexibility, for vulnerability and diversity. It's not a one-size-fits-all model for churches or ministries. It allows for each ministry and each local church to engage its context seriously, to be God with us for that specific community, for that specific neighborhood. If Jesus didn't come in the flesh in the neighborhood of first century Israel, if he came to the neighborhood today, do you think he'd do exactly everything the same way he did before? I think it's going to be different. So where has God placed you? And how are you going to be God with us to that neighborhood and that community? It defaults to a flexible backbone rather than a brick wall posture. Now, you don't want to be a jellyfish either, too. They just kind of flop around and be floating in the waves. But you don't want to be a brick wall. You want to have a flexible backbone. Last one, missional posture. When it comes to our missional posture with the world, the God against us posture assumes we know best. We have all the answers, and we need to go and conquer every square inch for God and march off to war. In Canada, we have had a very real example of this against missional posture in our history. The residential schools run by churches that separated indigenous children from their families because we know what's best for them without even asking, right? Because we have all the answers. Because we must coerce them, assimilate them, exercise power over them in order to save their souls. Because we must, I think this was a quote that was actually used in Parliament, I think, kill the Indian within them in order to save them. The ends justify the means. A missional posture that is marked with God with us is different. We are not doing mission to people as if they are objects. We are serving with them. I recently heard a presentation from Adrian Jacobs, who came to my church. Adrian Jacobs is the senior leader for Indigenous Justice and Reconciliation for the Christian Reformed Church in North America. And he was giving a presentation at my church, and he mentioned how in the 1960s, and this is to the credit of the CRC leaders in Canada, they chose not to start a residential school, unlike their US counterparts. They decided to first listen. They asked indigenous communities, and then they listened. What kind of ministry do you need? What kind of ministry do you want? They did not assume they knew what's best for them. And the result of that are the indigenous ministry centers that we see, that we have. That's why in Canada, in the Christian Reformed Church in Canada did not start a residential school. That is a missional posture of width, of humble humility, listening, asking, what do you want? And let's work with you on that. We are not conquering every square inch for Christ. We are looking to see what Christ is already doing on every square centimeter and join him there. We are ambassadors, not conquerors. I'm going to conclude now. I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to conclude by borrowing and adapting the canoeing imagery from Angela Biggs and Peter Sherman's book, Blessed Are the Undone. I know many of you here at this summit might be feeling sad or angry or uncertain about the future of your church or even about your future in your church. We are like people who have realized that our beloved campsite that we have been staying for so long no longer feels safe or comfortable. Maybe you have already left, or maybe you are leaving, or maybe you are being forced out of your beloved campsite, your spiritual home for many, many, many years. We can feel nostalgic and sad about this. We may not all be at the same stages of grief. I know I'm not at the same stage of grief as some of you are, because I've not been in this campsite for that long, as long as some of you. But I feel that there is a lot of collective grief and pain. Some of us may even use the image of having lost a loved one. Some of us feel like we have been betrayed. Yeah, and it hurts. It hurts. But we can't get stuck in our grief. We cannot get stuck in our grief. We cannot be defined by this moment. We can't get stuck in this moment. There is hope. I found that these past few days, I've been here since Wednesday, these few days have been hopeful for me. I don't know about for you. It's hopeful. Look at how many of us are here, and I don't know how many are watching online. It's like, what, over 150 about us, right? Over here?
I'll let you know in a second.
Oh, I mean, okay. I'm talking about just the in-person ones. It's 150 of us here. And there are over 40 churches represented all across Canada, from British Columbia to New Brunswick. And I said, I don't know how many are watching online and where they are from. But look at what we have already achieved. For those of you who have been here the whole week, these past few days, and the presentations you heard yesterday, I was blown away by what people have done and achieved yesterday. It was amazing. Yeah, give yourselves a clap. You have drafted theological statements, you have drafted theological postures, you have drafted mission and vision statements, you have drafted possible key values, you have drafted possible governance structures, you have drafted, and later this afternoon, who knows, maybe there's even possible next steps already. Look at how far you've already come. Yes, we have lost our beloved campsite, but we are building a canoe. We are building a canoe so that we don't get stuck on this beach. We are starting off in search of a new campsite. We have a rough idea of where we are going. Maybe we don't have it all mapped out on GPS, but we have a sense of direction. And when we get there, we can set up camp together. And we can only get there if we paddle together. And we can enjoy the beautiful scenery along the way. Last week, we celebrated Reformation Day. That wasn't always pretty either in the past with Martin Luther, what happened, right? It was messy and probably painful too. But what if God is using this movement? What if God is using all of us here to start something new for Canada? Who is to say that God can use us for his purpose, for his mission in Canada? I think the Holy Spirit is leading us to a new calling, to a new horizon, to a new campsite for the sake of God's mission in Canada. Are we going to go with God? Are we going to get into the canoe and start paddling? Thank you. Thanks.
228 views right now.
220 views online?
228 views online. So
Thank you.
people are watching. Lots of great comments online already, and I'm not even going to try to summarize them, but they're going to collect them for you.
Oh, thank you.
I don't even get to ask my question, thank goodness. If God is with us, is there a them?
Is there a them? I think it depends on what the questioner is trying to get at.
She's right there.
Oh. Do you mean them as in, okay, let me, hold on. It's fine. I will answer it this way. One of the great influential books that I read when I was in university was I and Thou, a philosophical book by Martin Buber, a Jewish mystical philosopher, I and Thou. And he talks about that you can look at, there are two ways of approaching the world and reality. You can approach something as an it, an object, I-it relationship, or you can approach it as a thou, a you, an I-you, I-thou relationship. And you could approach people as an I-it, reducing them to an object. Or you can approach a tree as a thou, as a you, and not relate to a tree as an object. You know, it's not just based on what things are, it's how you approach and how you relate to people and how you relate to things. And then another writer that in university that I'm also very influenced by was a Russian writer, literary theorist, critic, Mikhail Bakhtin, and he's influenced by Russian Eastern Orthodox, and a strong sense of the Trinity, and how the Trinity are the three in one, the unity and diversity piece. And for him, the phrase is dialogue. We can live as if everything is a monologue. That is, I have the voice and I speak and you listen. Just you need unilateral, one-directional. But he says that he believes that the world or reality is much better understood as a dialogue, or multiple dialogues, multiple voices. We are all speaking to each other. So that's a long way of talking about things. So I'm framing it up. you know that it's a famous saying, I think, therefore I am, right? I think, therefore I am, or I doubt, therefore I am, which is the original René Descartes says that. And I think Western culture always thinks in this way, I am because of this. My identity, who I am, is inside me, defined by me, inside me. And as a community, we are defined by us inside, so to speak. So the us is kind of this shell, kind of enclosed thing. So whenever we think about us, we think this. But what Buber and Bakhtin has taught me in the ideas about the I-you is really the most important reality, basic reality, and which is in one sense you think about it is love, right? I-you is love. I-it is not love. And when you think about the other one, monologue is not love, dialogue is love. And so both of these philosophers are in their own way, different ways, trying to talk about saying basic reality is love. And I could resonate with that as a Christian, because God is love, right? That's basic reality for us. And so what they taught me is no, it's not I think, therefore I am. It is we are, therefore I am, right? My existence is not just, my identity is not defined by just what I do or what me. It is defined by the people who love me, my community, and more importantly, the connections and the relationships we have with one another. That defines us. So when it comes to community, so that's what's the individual, right? But when it comes to community, the community is never defined. The we, the us, is not defined by this. It's defined by the relationship it has with them, all right? So to say, is there a them when God is with us, is to assume that there is an us that can survive and be identified and live without them. So I'm just questioning the assumption of the question, right? So, but I'm saying from a biblical perspective, I wrote somewhere in the blog too, that reality is being with. Reality is not being. Being is, in the Bible, is always a being in relationship. A being in relationship with God, a being in relationship with each other, and a being in relationship with creation. Those three major relationships define who we are. So God is with us, all of us, in that sense. And through that, we can find the I, and through that, we can find the small we's, right? The small communities. It is we and you, not we and them, not us versus them. It is we and you together in the same boat. I hope that answers that. So it's a whole long way of answering it, but I hope that helps.
So another question. The pendulum tends to swing sometimes, right? We've done that. Oh, we got to correct.
I don't know if it has to, but it does.
It does. Because of the Earth's rotation, things swing. Can you expand then a little bit more, and maybe you have already answered part of this, can you expand on how to balance orthocardia, orthopraxy, and orthodoxy, which really then leads into the three strands that we've sort of held on to for so many years with doctrine, piety, and transformation.
Okay, you added a bunch of things into it at the end.
Don't worry about the additional.
Right.
How do we balance?
I'm not 100% sold that it is mapping the orthocardia, orthodoxy, orthopraxy maps identically to the three strands you're talking about in the Christian Reformed Church. There's some overlap, but I don't know if it maps directly. I wouldn't go that far. But it is not easy to do a balance of the three, especially since we haven't really talked about the orthocardia very much to begin with. It's sort of new for Reformed tradition people, right? Maybe we can learn a lot more from the contemplative tradition on that score. And I think we need to learn from other traditions on that score. Yes, you do not want to just, autocardia doesn't necessarily mean just let your emotions rule over you or run amok. That's not what it means, right? It's more about how do you align your heart, your desires with what God desires and what God loves. And there is a way I had toyed about whether I should bring up Jamie Smith's work on habits of the heart kind of thing into this, but there's a connection there too. So where Jamie Smith, the philosopher, Christian philosopher, says that our love is very much shaped by our habits. It's not shaped by what we think, but it's shaped by our habits. What we do all the time, every day, what our default actions are and whatnot, right? And often the habits that are in the community that we are part of. And so those habits, those liturgies, you will call it, shapes our elephant. You go back to that metaphor. It doesn't really shape our rider it shapes our rider, but we think that shaping our rider is all that we need. No, the elephant is what needs to be shaped. So that the elephant needs to be trained to love and go where God goes and God loves. That's what's needed here. That's what the autocardia, I think, is leading towards too. And so I think Jamie Smith's work is helpful in that, try to help balance that out a little bit.
So coffee break begins in 2 minutes, and we want to give you enough time to prepare for your next session. But this is a really compelling question. Our tradition has a history of secession. This new thing seems exciting and compelling. I'm reticent to get into the canoe because of this history. How do we keep history from repeating itself in this regard? How do we mitigate against a split in this canoe in 10 or 15 years?
Right, yeah.
And I don't know if you can answer it or if that's, something that we place before us as part of our horizon.
Yeah. A lot of the splits happen when you start building walls. Building brick walls is what precipitates. Because when you build walls, you create an out and in, and you're forcing people to choose in or out, right? If you build doors, you can have it both ways. People can come in and out all the time. It doesn't have to be walls to define identity, right? Or demarcate your property. You don't need to build a tall fence that blocks you off from your neighbor and you never see them 24/7. People in the past at some point could have, there's some communities, and I read somewhere before, some of the Latino communities love to have at the front of their properties these low fences. So it demarcates their property, but it doesn't stop them from saying hi to their neighbors. In fact, often people just kind of sit on their fences, right, and chat and talk with their neighbors who are walking by. It's a welcoming boundary, so to speak. It's a welcoming marker as opposed to a closed-off marker. You know what I'm saying? It's not necessarily, it's like, as I said, it's not totally, if you say no to a brick wall, it doesn't mean you are a jellyfish. But the brick walls create the schisms. If you just turn them all into this little, inviting, maybe, flower-filled, little fences, I don't know what you call them, or, that is inviting, and people can always just walk over, and people can just sit on it and even have chats and conversations that is inviting, then maybe we don't have so many schisms. And so what I'm saying is a God with us spirituality may help prevent schisms. A God with us Christianity can make those inviting markers as opposed to the excluding boundaries. And hopefully there won't be a schism 10 years down the road, because if we are truly living into this God with us approach, right? This flexible backbone as opposed to the brick walls, by God's grace, there may not be any kind of further splits.
2 final comments. We miss your voice. We need your voice. And lots of tears.
Thank you.
Do not be afraid, this is what you say. What if we are afraid, Lord? Love your enemies, this is what you say.